Welcome to today's episode of Political Pulse. Political Pulse is a student-run podcast at Scotch College where we discuss topical issues with experts in diplomacy, foreign policy, and who have experiences in international diplomacy. Greatest thanks to His Excellency High Commissioner from Australia to Brunei, Luke Arnold, for being on the podcast today to talk about his experiences and discuss student opportunities in the future. We recognize that his schedule must be especially busy, so we would like to greatly appreciate him for his time on the podcast. Luke Arnold, as a High Commissioner from Australia to Brunei Darussalam, is involved in important decisions that encourage trade opportunities between the two states, which can build social and cultural prosperity. Prior to his employment as High Commissioner, Luke has worked in various different sectors of diplomacy, such as the UN, and he has also worked in the public sector of DFAT for an extended period of time.
Okay, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Firstly, we would love to get onto some questions about your past and your history, such as working at our Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and we would like to sort of get into that. So, firstly, what has made your career and journey in the Southeast Asia rewarding?
Great. Well, it's a good first question, and I have spent almost all of my career working either in or on Southeast Asia in various places. What's rewarding about that for me is that Australia and Southeast Asia are neighbours, but we're actually quite different, at least superficially quite different, and we have different histories and cultures. And I think it's actually rare in the world to see sort of neighbouring countries that are as different as Australia and our Southeast Asian neighbours. And therein lies, a lot of opportunity. It's a sort of, I feel like our relationship with our near neighbours in Southeast Asia is very underdone. We don't know a lot about. Not many Australians know a lot about Southeast Asia. Not many Southeast Asians know a lot about Australia. So what makes a career working to bring the countries together rewarding for me is just we're operating from a pretty low base, and it's an opportunity to bring parts of the world, bring neighbours together who haven't done enough together in the past. And so I find that really, really rewarding, building bonds of sort of neighbourly cooperation.
Thank you so much for that. It must be excellent working in Southeast Asia, and a lot of students would love to sort of get that connection and cultural experiences from that. Can you describe any experiences that have encouraged your passion for working in Brunei?
Right. Well, I think Brunei is obviously part of Southeast Asia, and I think Southeast Asia is one of the most dynamic parts of the world at the moment. It's the societies in Southeast Asia are changing quite rapidly. The economies are dynamic and mostly growing. So it's an exciting place to be as a region. I've really enjoyed being in Brunei specifically over the last kind of 18 months, and I think what makes my experience here really enjoyable is the people. People are always what can make or break an experience overseas, and Bruneians are just very warm, very hospitable, and in my case, very accessible as well. So one of the things I love about working here is that I've made excellent relationships with very senior decision makers across government, and if there's any information I need or anything I need to try to persuade people of, I can just get on a WhatsApp and just have an exchange with the relevant minister. And so that sort of level of accessibility and the frank conversations that I can have with the most important decision makers in the country makes it really like quite rewarding. But it's also a great place to live, and one of the reasons for that is because it's really safe and peaceful and tranquil. And I always think, like, in terms of specific experiences, the one that I talk about quite a lot was on a really hot day just a few months ago. I was walking outside my office in the middle of town, and there was an ice cream van, and it was turned on with the window down, and no driver in sight. So I reckon in an Australian city, it might have lasted about 2 minutes before someone jumped in. And I did sort of have a brief thought of jumping in and commandeering that ice cream van for the rest of the day, just driving down to the beach for the afternoon. But it says something about Brunei that you can have on a sweltering hot day, literally in the middle of the city, an ice cream van, engine running with no driver in sight. So it just sort of says something about the level of trust and the sort of the safety, I guess, of this place.
Sounds like a very great experience to have in Brunei, and obviously the working at the public sector has been able to encourage your experiences in Brunei and been able to help you move and been able to make your experiences in Brunei more memorable. And your career in the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade has spanned the last 15 years, as we said before, which is quite a long amount of time. And what experiences have you had in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade?
Well, I've done, this is my third overseas posting, and so before this, I was a deputy ambassador and head of our development cooperation program in Cambodia, and then I did a stint in Canberra before that, and before that, I was posted to our embassy in Jakarta. So I spent time in Indonesia, Cambodia, and Brunei, and what I really like about representing Australia in those countries is, as I mentioned earlier, the ability to build links between neighbours where we haven't had really strong relationships or not strong enough in the past. So I find that really rewarding. But it's really the jobs that you can do in the public sector, including with DFAT, really do allow you to make a difference to people's lives, both Australians and the lives of our neighbours here in Southeast Asia. So in Indonesia, I was able to work very closely with the Electoral Commission to ensure that the elections in 2014 were run peacefully. And so that was a really important thing for both Australia and Indonesia to guarantee that Indonesia could run peaceful and democratic elections. So I found that very meaningful. I worked with people to help set up a legal aid system for the first time in Indonesia, which I think will ultimately have a big impact on Indonesians' lives, but good benefits for Australia as well in terms of political stability. In Cambodia, I worked very closely with think tanks, and it was really exciting. And we also helped to set up a social security system. And here in Brunei, just 2 months ago, I was able to bring the Sultan down to Australia, introduce him to Prime Minister Albanese, and they signed, the Sultan and the Prime Minister signed a comprehensive partnership agreement between our two countries. And so that was also very rewarding to work on. So you can really have a massive impact working for the Australian government, particularly in the foreign affairs portfolio. And I've really enjoyed that.
Well, you've already touched on it, but this follows very well into the next question, especially with bilateral negotiations between Australia and the Southeast Asia region, where there's been a lot of beneficial things going along, where even normal civilians have benefited from the diplomacy and the bilateral cooperation between Australia and these regions, which has really done well. And this sort of, what makes bilateral diplomacy between Australia and Brunei so important?
Well, I think the thing that I talk a lot to people about here is just how close Australia is. I mean, Brunei has a lot of friends all over the world, and so does Australia. But our countries are so geographically proximate, which makes the relationship really important in many ways. But it was interesting, for example, when the Sultan visited Australia, he came to Canberra and then to Melbourne, and then his final stop was actually in Darwin. And I went in advance of him arriving in Darwin. I flew up from Melbourne the night before, and when he then arrived in Darwin, I was able to say, look, Your Majesty, you're actually more than halfway home. You left Melbourne and flew to Darwin. Then you're flying on back to Brunei this afternoon, but you're already more than halfway there. So it just really, and then I think it really showed he sort of chuckled at that, and his ministers and advisors were making the same comments, that actually Darwin is closer to Brunei than it is to Melbourne and Canberra, which really shows just how close our countries are. So that's I think a key reason why we need a good relationship, just the geographic proximity. But I think there's Brunei is, of course, a member of ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and it chairs ASEAN every 10 years and has an equal voice in ASEAN forums. And so that makes it really important to engage with Brunei regionally as well as bilaterally, because they do have this voice in what is a very important forum for Australia. The strength of ASEAN as an organisation has massive benefits for Australia in terms of the stability of our near neighbourhood. And so that's another reason why we need a strong relationship with Brunei. Another, and you touched on it in your introduction about trade, is that Brunei is very committed to open markets and open trade. They are a member of CPTPP and ANZFTA and RCEP. These are all long acronyms, but they're basically all very important trade agreements that Australia is part of. And so Brunei has been a real advocate for open trade and reducing tariffs. And they exercise that voice, and that's in our interests. And ultimately, that helps our farmers and our exporters to sell more to our neighbours and improve the prosperity of Australian households. So that ultimately has a very important impact on Australia's prosperity, that championing of open markets and free trade. And then finally, and this is a little politically sensitive, but Brunei is a claimant to part of the South China Sea, and Australia has an interest in ensuring that the various claims to that area are managed according to international law, and that they allow freedom of navigation, because that's critical for our trade and security interests. So these are the kind of reasons why Australia is very keen to continue to strengthen our relationship with Brunei.
Even looking at the sort of individual perspectives of travelling from Brunei to Australia or Australia to Brunei, and having these very close neighbourhood-like relationships with these countries in the Southeast Asia region, especially Brunei, it sort of, as your own personal experience, what have you enjoyed about Brunei as a location over the last few years since your appointment as the High Commissioner?
Yeah, good question. I have really enjoyed it, and so has my family. The first thing we noticed when we flew into Brunei was that a huge chunk of the country is pristine forest. It's I think it's like more than 70%, and that's actually the quality of the forest is actually better than most parts of Brunei's neighbours. And so you fly and you see this thick green forest, and I've had the privilege of being able to explore parts of the rainforest here, and I just love it. It's just thousands of years old, and this thick green forest. It's just beautiful. So that's been like a real highlight for my family and I, just exploring that through the various hiking trails and things they have here. I mentioned earlier the people are just super warm and relaxed and friendly. They invite me into their homes and make me feel very welcome. And there's just this vibe of tranquility about the place as well. It's very peaceful, and anyone who comes to Brunei generally feels that it's sort of there's this quite unusual, tranquil feel to the place, which is quite beautiful. So there's a lot to enjoy here, and we've enjoyed. I'm probably about halfway through our posting now, and you're really enjoying it.
All right, so Many Australian students are keen to search for opportunities in countries other than home. Could you discuss the educational and cultural experiences Australian students could gain in Brunei and vice versa?
Sure. So, I mean, I'll focus mainly on opportunities for Australian students to come up here and learn about Brunei. I mean, I think it's worthwhile pursuing opportunities to come here, partly because the national language is Malay, which is, of course, also spoken in Malaysia, parts of Singapore, but it's very similar to Indonesian. So if you come up here and you spend time and you learn Malay here, you'll be able to also travel and converse with Indonesian. So it's really important and valuable from that perspective. I think I mentioned earlier Brunei is a very safe place. It's very welcoming. So I think it makes sense for Australian students to look at spending time up here. There are different ways to do that. I'll highlight a couple of opportunities. I mean, the one that I'm really trying to boost is the new Colombo Plan, which you may have heard of, but that's essentially it's a scholarship program for university students in Australia to access Asia and spend time in Asia. And there are different new Colombo Plan offerings, but you could come up under that plan for a semester at a university here. There are also internship opportunities through that. To intern at different companies and organizations. And so we're hoping to get more and more students up to Brunei to participate in educational opportunities funded by the new Colombo Plan. So I think that's a really a key one. And there's good information up on the web about the NCP, the new Colombo Plan. So I'd encourage you as students progress into university to look at those and to apply for the new Colombo Plan, which is really, I think, I hope will become a bit of a rite of passage for students who want to work in foreign affairs and in the region, because I just think it's a fantastic program set up by the previous government and been fully embraced by the current one. It's great to have that bipartisan support, and the reason why there is such strong bipartisan support for the new Colombo Plan is because it's just such an important initiative. So I think that's a really important one to take advantage of. There are a range of other ones, but one that seems to attract quite impressive Bruneians, but also Australians to come up and engage with them is it's called A2ELP, and I think it's the Australia ASEAN Emerging Leaders Program, and I think it's targeted at young social entrepreneurs, and I think it sort of starts at 18 to maybe 30 or something like that, and that involves various networking opportunities and short trips for people who are interested in making a social impact. And that's also funded by DFAT, and it's a shorter program, but also a great one for students, particularly university students, to engage in. So that's the A2ELP. And again, that's advertised through DFAT's social media.
Yeah, that sounds like some really...
I definitely encourage you to look at those. And there are many other opportunities as well. And if you look at DFAT's website and social media, they're all highlighted there.
Yeah, that sounds like some really great opportunities for students to open up into the world of foreign affairs and relations. How does the exchange of culture and individual experiences between Australia and Brunei help strengthen the relationship between the two countries?
Well, I think people-to-people relationships are really the backbone of any kind of bilateral relationship. And so I mentioned earlier there are opportunities for Australians to come up and learn about Brunei. We also have a lot of Bruneian students coming down to Australia to study as well, and we provide scholarships for them. Many are self-funded as well, and there's short courses and all sorts of other things. But that two-way exchange, particularly with students, because I think students are usually a more formative part of their lives, but all kinds of people-to-people links, including business links, are really important, because ultimately it's hard for two governments to develop a really deep, enduring relationship if that is not supported by their respective populations. We have to have legitimacy from our publics to continue to deepen those links. And if you look at the relationships that Australia has that are kind of probably the deepest ones, often that's supported by, or in some cases even led by, kind of the people-to-people exchanges, and then the government is then given a license to deepen its relationships as well. So people-to-people links are absolutely critical, and part of my job is to foster those.
Yeah, absolutely. How has DFAT's graduate program helped facilitate the opportunity for young Australians to enter the world of foreign policy?
Well, it's a great program, and I would encourage anyone interested in a career in foreign affairs to apply for the DFAT grad program. It provides an intensive period of training and mentoring. This year, actually, we had that they've introduced, I don't know if it's going to be an ongoing thing or not, but if they've introduced a 1 month overseas placement as part of the grad program. So my team here in Brunei had the privilege of hosting someone doing the DFAT grad program. Her name was Osana. So she came up a few months ago and spent a month with us, and there's, that is this fantastic experience for somebody doing their sort of first full-time job and engaging as a diplomat overseas. So there's great training opportunities, and then it really sets you up for a career in the public service, including overseas. So definitely encourage people to apply for that.
What other opportunities exist to help young Australians find work in the Australian government relations sectors, such as DFAT, and in experiencing foreign policy setting and diplomacy in the Southeast Asia region, including Brunei?
Another good question. I think spending time in Southeast Asia is really important if you want to demonstrate that you have the skills and the attributes to be a diplomat or to work in the foreign affairs space in Southeast Asia. So, and there are many opportunities to help Australians spend time in Southeast Asia. So one of the ones that I did, which is still going, is the Australia-Indonesia Youth Exchange Program, where 18 Australians each year are fully funded to spend a couple of months over their sort of summer holidays in Indonesia. And I again encourage you to look at applying for that. It's a really great program, AYEP, Australian Indonesia Youth Exchange Program. There are others as well. I mean, Australian Volunteers, that's run by the NGO sector. That's also a great way to get out into Southeast Asia, and there are many programs that are funded by the Australian government to support people to do those volunteer placements. So I think there's a range of different opportunities, but getting out and spending time in Southeast Asia is a really good way to demonstrate, to learn and to demonstrate that you have the commitment and the skills that the government requires.
Thank you so much for answering those questions about opportunities that students may find in Brunei and the Southeast Asia region, especially through public sectors such as the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. We would like to go on to maybe asking a few questions about careers in Brunei for students that may already have done their degree or may already be looking for internships. So what opportunities will students ready to enter the workforce in Brunei from Australia be able to engage in?
So at the moment, most of the Australians living here in Brunei are working in the education sector. So there's a lot of teachers at the international schools. There are a lot of English teachers here. There are academics working at the the universities here. So it's at the moment quite sort of education sector focused. So if you want a career teaching, there are many opportunities here. I think over time there'll be, I hope there'll be a broader range of opportunities for Australians to come and live and work here. I think as Brunei is currently very focused, its economy is focused on oil and gas, but it's in the process of transitioning to a clean economy, and Australians with the skills that Brunei needs to make that transition will be in high demand. So I'd also encourage people to get skills in clean energy and the clean economy. That I think will ultimately be very valuable both in Australia and in the region.
Thank you so much for that. You talked before in the last section about these economic ties that exist not only between Brunei and Australia, but all across the Southeast Asia region, including ASEAN, a multilateral trade agreement, and a few bilateral trade agreements that exist, especially between Brunei and Australia. So there's very strong economic ties and trade ties that encourage these sort of job growths between Australia and Brunei. So what economic ties exist between Brunei and Australia that those interested in careers in Brunei will benefit from?
Well, one that I'm really working on and that is starting to show some early potential is the halal food sector. So Brunei has an excellent halal brand, and there is, of course, a massive market globally for halal food. There are huge populations of Muslims in South Asia, Middle East, Africa, and beyond, and of course here in our region. And Australia and Brunei can really work together, I think, to take advantage of that. We have very high quality raw materials. Our meat and vegetables, dairy products are world class. Brunei has a good geographic location within the middle of Southeast Asia. It has an interest in developing that halal food sector and a great kind of halal brand. And so I think we can work together to make products that the world is interested in buying. So I think that's a really important trade and economic link that's starting to develop.
Yeah, well, especially with those sort of economic links with the food markets, I think that a lot of Australians interested in doing those sorts of trade operations across the two countries would be extremely beneficial, and it shows a great point for the enhancing of economic ties between the two countries, especially with the growth of these new industries between Brunei and Australia that individuals can greatly benefit from. Following on from this, do you think there will be a growth in economic exchanges and trade relations in the future with Australia and Brunei?
Well, I hope so. It's part of my job. But I can say that in 2022, Australia was Brunei's largest export market. So Brunei sold more goods and services to Australia than it did to any other country in the world. So we're already quite significant economic partners. At least we are significant for Brunei. But I hope that moving forward, we can diversify that relationship a bit more. It's quite focused still on oil and gas, and I'd like to see it diversify. So I'd like, as I mentioned with the food, I'd like Australia to be exporting more like agricultural products to Brunei, and hopefully also renewable energy technology. And then I think Brunei has the potential to not only sell us processed halal products, but also maybe low emissions fertilizer and And I'm quite excited about what Brunei can offer in terms of ecotourism. I think that Australians quite like camping and trekking and being outside, and Brunei has fantastic kind of ecotourism potential, both in terms of diving and also the forests. So that's a great sort of service industry that Brunei will hopefully develop over time, and Australia might be a key market for that. So I think in both directions there's a lot of potential, and I'd like to see that tapped.
It's a very interesting sort of forum of economic exchanges with Brunei and Australia, especially with 1 year's figures of Australia and Brunei's figures for trade reaching a total of nearly 1.5 billion, and only seeing gradual increases in that amount, which shows a growing strengthening of economic ties between Brunei and Australia. So seeing these mutual benefits where both of these countries and states can operate on this mutually beneficial economic level, where individuals in these countries can travel and experience the great outdoors or experience these trips and grow economic markets as well, what mutual benefits can be sown by enhancing further relationships between Australia and countries in the Southeast Asia regions, such as Brunei?
Well, I think at the moment there's those economic relationships you've just mentioned. They have a very important impact on the prosperity of Australia and Southeast Asia. So I think that's a really clear one. I'd say there are probably a couple of other reasons why it's absolutely critical for us to invest in our relationships with Southeast Asia. The first would be that we can't deal with common challenges in our region without strong relationships. So there are many common challenges we need to work together on, from climate change to global pandemics to transnational crime. We can't solve these issues ourselves without engaging very closely with our neighbours, particularly in Southeast Asia. But there's also I think we're living in a more challenging geopolitical context. Great power competition in our region is intensifying, and we need to build really strong relationships with Southeast Asia to ensure that our region, our shared region, can manage that effectively, and to take advantages of the opportunities that the changes entail, and to manage the downsides. And our foreign minister talks a lot about guardrails. So this is the idea that there are sort of mechanisms in place that prevent the great powers from descending into conflict. So there's obviously competition between, for example, the US and China, but we want to make sure that that competition doesn't turn into conflict, because no one wins from that. But to make sure that that happens, we need really strong relationships with our Southeast Asian neighbours to then lean on both the US and China to make sure that they have put in place the mechanisms to stop conflict.
It is so great to have these relationships, and especially, as you said, it creates a sort of comforting shield with all of these relationships, meaning that countries can negotiate economically, and instead of diminishing on economic importance, countries can grow and strengthen economics and individual prosperity, even to the position of the individual civilian, which is really great to have in the Southeast Asia region, especially considering the time that we're in and the current political conflicts that have been developing in the Southeast Asia region, which can only benefit from these economic ties. I would like to pass on to Nikki to thank and conclude on the podcast.
Yeah, so that's all the questions that we have today. We would again like to thank you for taking this time to discuss with us an insight into working in Brunei, foreign policy, and discussing overseas opportunities and careers within Brunei. Luke, is there anything else you would like to say?
If it's okay, can I take a selfie?